It is a public health crisis that kills hundreds of Americans a day. More than 100,000 Americans die each year from overdoses, mostly from opioids. That is higher than the toll from gun and car crash deaths combined. Fentanyl, cocaine and meth are the most abused drugs in the United States. But there's a new addiction, more potent, more lethal and deadly. It's called Xylazine, which is an animal tranquilizer which is deepening addiction, baffling law enforcement and causing wounds so severe that some result in amputation. So what is driving the urge, and has America lost the war on drugs? To answer that and more, Robert G. Kanter, a commentator and recovery advocate on fentanyl epidemic, is joining us from New York. Robert, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Eric. It's an honor and privilege to be here.
Thank you very much. What's happening in America? Tell us about this opioid epidemic. Why has it turned out this bad, and what's making it hard for the authorities to deal with it?
Yeah, like you said in your opening, it really is a public health crisis in this country, and it's really not getting any better. There's a number of factors here, Eric. The first factor is that unlike in years past when we were talking about cocaine or other drugs that, you know, that the supply, that the production was only a limited amount, you have a situation now where the drug cartels can produce an endless amount of the fentanyl and using these precursor chemicals from China. And so therefore, the problem is it's not about how much they can produce, it's about how much they can traffic in. It's very, very highly addictive. All right, we know the fentanyl is extremely potent and in a very small amount. And then there's the element of social media too, which is anonymous, enormous, and very accessible. Those are really the key components there that are driving this epidemic.
Many question America's lack of addiction care, which they say is exacerbating the problem. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely not, Eric. There is tremendous amount of care. We had just had legislation passed called the MAT Act, M-A-T. There used to be a waiver that prevented physicians from writing for a prescription for medication called buprenorphine. That has now been eliminated, so many, many more, hundreds of thousands of more physicians in this country will now be able to write those prescriptions. There is a tremendous amount of care, but the influx of the fentanyl and the meth, which is making a comeback, is so great, and the trafficking in is so great that it's not about the treatment or the access to treatment. It's just that the streets are being flooded by this, and it's really just very difficult for law enforcement and the treatment community to wrap their hands around it. And it's a very complicated cocktail of moving parts here, Eric, that's really not as easy as it might sound to solve, you know, in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. The main culprit, I will just tell you, are the chemicals, the precursor chemicals coming from China, the fact that the Mexican cartels can produce an endless amount in the clandestine laboratories, and the amount that they're trafficking in, and the social media. And when you put it all together, it's very, very hard to get to wrap your hands around that and get it under control.
Let's talk about care, and some doctors hold stigmatizing views about addiction and the patients afflicted or affected by it and refuse to provide treatment. Is it true? Is that happening in American hospitals right now?
Oh no, Eric, just the opposite. You know, we talk about what is stigma. Stigma is the absence of compassion. There is a tremendous amount of awareness, a hyper-awareness in this country of the people that are suffering from substance use disorder. And there has been more treatment than there's ever been, and more funding from Congress than there has ever been. So no, really, the stigma in terms of the medical community is almost, I would say, really non-existent. If there's any stigma, it's just in the general population, and usually the older generation in the general population that really just don't have an understanding that substance use disorder is a disorder. It's an illness. It's not a moral failing, or it's not a flaw in someone's character. So I would tell you that the stigma, although it's part of the problem, is not a huge piece of the puzzle here right now that we're dealing with. It used to be many, many years ago, Eric. It's not the case today.
It's not the case today. Let's talk about this new addictive drug called Xylazine. First of all, who invented the euphoria about this animal tranquilizer? And apart from causing skin disease, severe wounds, which could even lead to amputation, What more do we know about this so-called zombie drug?
Yeah, xylazine. Well, what you have to understand is, well, xylazine is an animal tranquilizer, like you said. It's a sedative. And what you have is the Mexican drug cartels, the main two Mexican cartels, Sinaloa and Jalisco, are continuing to reinvent themselves, whether it's for profitability or whether it's for addiction purposes, to make these drugs more highly addictive. So what they're doing is they're replacing the fentanyl, they're putting in the xylazine, which is not a controlled substance, they're mixing it together. It's extremely addictive, and so it costs them less to produce, and it's something new on the streets. And so it's almost, for lack of a better term, Eric, it's a marketing ploy by the cartels to kind of mix and match to put something very addictive that's out there, save money on their end, and provide something new on the streets. And it's called Tranq. Tranq is the street name for the xylazine mixed with fentanyl, and it's mixed with other substances as well. So it's a problem. It is showing up in more overdose fatalities and accidental fatalities, because they're not all overdose related. But I do think that the DEA has a tremendous handle on this now. I'm just looking here at some literature that was just issued on the xylazine. But it is another issue. But we are certainly on top of this, Eric, much more than we were, years ago with the fentanyl. That's for certain.
But let me ask you this. Is it these images that we see on social media of people or addicts being zombified, are they true, or is there some lie in it?
No, Eric, it's true, but we're talking about a minuscule part of the population. I mean, you have the Kensington area in Pennsylvania that is like a miniature zombie land, but we're talking about only a few blocks wide, in a small neighborhood. That's certainly not indicative of the way things are in this country right now. Mm-hmm. There are small pockets of areas where you have a lot of individuals that suffer from substance use disorder that are also homeless, that might be criminals, that are very sick. The police come in, they clean it up, and then they come right back because they have nowhere to go. And that's where the drug dealers, they leave and then they come back. It's a very, very difficult problem. But I've seen those videos, and the ones called Zombieland, they do exist. Those areas do exist, but they're very, very far and few between. So I wouldn't focus just on that. I mean, that's not the norm by any chance. That's the exception.
All right. Robert, illicit fentanyl has displaced legally prescribed painkillers as the main cause of overdoses in the United States. Most victims are young people. What's driving them to opt for this drug? It's a combination of the availability and the accessibility. So when, in the past, when you had illicit drug transactions, Eric, they were done on the street or they were face-to-face transactions. Now things can be done anonymously on Snapchat or on Instagram or even on Facebook, on most of the major social media platforms. And so you have easy accessibility. You have highly addictive drugs. You have, drug dealers that are just pushing these in tremendous, tremendous volume, and they're not expensive. So when you put all of that together, it becomes very appealing to individuals that, that are in that age where they're going to be using drugs, where they're going to be going to music festivals, the rave parties and all of that stuff. But let's just understand something, and I'll try to make this quick. I know you want to move quickly, Eric, but there are, because of the underprescribing now, because of the opioid epidemic and the fact that physicians are being very careful with how much they prescribe in terms of pain medications, there are many individuals that are not addicted and suffer from substance use disorder that have, for example, chronic back pain, that cannot get any more pain medications from their physicians. So they go out onto the internet looking for some because they are legitimately in pain. And when they purchase these online, through these clandestine, through the dark web or wherever the case might be, whatever platform, many times these oxycodones, these Percocets, these Vicodins are laced with and cut with fentanyl, even xylazine, and extremely potent, extremely deadly. Let's forget, or let's not talk about the painkillers for now. Let's focus on these drugs and their effects going forward. For those who do not know, why is fentanyl so deadly? Could you explain?
It's the potency. It's basically the potency. So if you can imagine the tip of a pencil, Eric, and maybe 10 granules of salt, that's enough to kill you. So in the past, when you use drugs, if they were mixed with other things, it was, if you had cocaine, it might be cut with a baking soda. Okay, so you knew a portion of it was going to be cut with baking soda, but baking soda is not going to kill you. It's just a filler. This is a whole different ballgame. So unless someone is carrying naloxone or they're right next door to an ambulance, the fact of the matter is it's so lethal, and you experience what's called hypervia, which is, you stop breathing, and it's very, very deadly. But to answer your question, fentanyl, which was just produced by the Mexican cartels from the precursor chemicals from China, is an extremely, extremely potent illicit drug that is being put into other medications or other drugs that are being bought.
In some instances, fentanyl can be ordered from overseas and delivered by post. Smuggling is also a big issue in America. What's making it difficult for authorities to curtail these networks or even the notorious borders like Mexico?
Well, that is the problem. It's the amount, as I mentioned before, because what's stopping the endless supply, the endless manufacturing of fentanyl and these other illicit drugs is the amount of the only thing is the amount of precursor chemicals they can purchase from the Chinese transnational criminals. That's all that's stopping them. But nonetheless, they pretty much, for the most part, for the purpose of this conversation, produce an endless supply of fentanyl. So therefore, there's as much supply as necessary. Their smuggling techniques are very sophisticated. Roughly 75% of the drugs that are coming in through legal entry points on our southern borders. And the DEA, their funding has increased. They are increasing their level of technology, their scanning technology. But it is such a massive amount that's coming through that it's just been extremely difficult to get a handle on all of it. And once it's through, then, we always say that the social media platforms are the superhighway of the drugs, because then from there they go into stash houses and they're distributed through social media, platforms, and then they're smuggled into other areas, or they're sent by post, or whatever the case is.
Robert, lawmakers are also pushing for something called naloxone, the overdose reversal medication, to be sold over the counter. An important measure that could help save thousands of lives. What would be the impact if this medication is okayed? Do you support the move?
Oh, tremendously, tremendously. So what is naloxone, Eric? Naloxone is a mist spray that you can carry, and you don't have to have any medical training. Basically, if someone, God forbid, should stop breathing because they have overdosed on, let's say, a drug with fentanyl, a straight fentanyl, you simply spray twice in their nose, and it will reverse the effects of that overdose. Now, there's a lot of controversy with it because many of the parents, especially in schools, many parents don't want their kids to carry it because they feel that if their physician didn't prescribe it for their kids, they don't want to know from it. In this scenario, stigma does play a part because now you're asking the general public to get involved. Naloxone has been proven to save thousands and thousands of lives. There is a lot of legislation, state level and the federal level, to get this approved, to get it distributed, to get it over the counter to as many people as possible. It's a win-win situation. There are no side effects from it. There's no cost to it. It's really just a matter of getting the word out to the public and getting it into the mainstream of the American population.
Robert, finally, and in your brief assessment, what do Americans, lawmakers, and even health officials need to do to step up to prevent and even adequately respond to the opioid epidemic?
Well, this is the favorite part of when I do these interviews, because I throw people for a loop when I say this. But when we talk about reversing this public health crisis, Eric, there are many moving parts, whether it's the security at our border, or whether it's going after the cartels, or whether it's going after the social media companies. In my estimation, the biggest way that you will reverse this fentanyl epidemic is by consistent daily media coverage. as we had with the coronavirus. And everything from there trickles down. To keep this top of mind, that's why what you're doing right now is so critical. What you're doing now, Eric, and Wion News is saving lives. But we must daily, it's a public health emergency, have this on the air, let people know what's going on, what they can do. They should speak to the legislators. What is Narcan? You know, supporting all these different grassroots organizations. For me, as a commentator, I will tell you that. And also, and I don't know if we did mention this, I am a person in recovery from substance use disorder. So this is very personal for me, as is my daughter. So that's what I think more than anything else is consistent media coverage on this issue.
All right, thank you very much for that acknowledgement. Robert G. Kanter, a commentator and recovery advocate on fentanyl epidemic. Thank you, Robert, for talking to Wion Wild is One today.
Thank you, Eric. It's an honor and privilege. Be well, my friend.
Thank you. Wion is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.